Good evening and welcome to the Westford School Committee member for, hard to keep track, March 16th, 2021. This is a unique meeting of the school committee as part of our superintendent search process. I'm going to go through the housekeeping. If this is the second or third time that you've probably heard this, my apologies, but we're going through it to be official. So this is a public meeting of the school committee. It's accessible via Zoom or on Westford Cat, where you can view it on online streaming through Westford Cat or through your cable television provider. This meeting will be recorded and posted on Westford Cat online. And if you attend via Zoom, you will receive a link to a SurveyMonkey feedback form, and you can provide your feedback to the school committee. That link will be emailed to you after the meeting. This is, of course, part of our superintendent search process. Tonight, we will be interviewing the third of 4 finalists. So welcome to Dr. Christopher Chu. This is a culmination of a long day for Dr. Chu. He's had a series of visits with school leaders, municipal partners, students, teachers, parents from a special education community, as well as a broad community forum just recently this evening. So you have indeed run the gauntlet, Dr. Chu, and you are now at the end. This is your final meeting for tonight. And this is the official interview with school committee, which will last approximately 75 minutes. Dr. Chu will give you the opportunity to make opening remarks in a few minutes. Then we have about a dozen, baker's dozen questions prepared for you. We'll pass the virtual mic around. And then with any time remaining, we'll ask school committee members if they have any follow-up questions. Then we'll give you the opportunity to have some closing remarks. We will bid you good evening and remove you from the panel, but you're welcome to stay with us if you so choose. At that point, we offer everyone on school committee the opportunity to share any information that was learned during the reference check process or during site visits. Site visits were rather unique in this situation because the Westford School Committee was visiting Westford, but yet we went through the exact same process we would with any finalist, except for the part that we did not meet with ourselves because that would have been weird. So we will share that information, and we do that transparently so that everyone on school committee, even if you weren't able to be in all of the meetings during the day, is operating from the same exact information, and the public has access to that information as well. However, caveat is that this is not a time to start deliberating on a final selection. All deliberations will take place after the interview process is complete, and that will take place on Thursday evening in our public meeting on Thursday, March 18th. So last reminder that I can think of is Dr. Chu, I know you've been in a lot of meetings today. You might get asked a similar question. Feel free to repeat that information that you might have given in an earlier meeting because we might not have all heard the answer and the public might not have heard the answer. So don't worry if it's a similar question and you might be repeating something from earlier in the day. Alicia, did I forget anything?
I don't think you forgot anything, but I do want to do our customary thank you to everyone who has participated. Thank you to our stakeholder groups who were part of the site visit meetings back and forth, our leadership team, our staff, our parents, our municipal partners. Thank you especially to our partners in the central office who helped us set up all of these meetings and who have been helping all of this run smoothly. And thank you to Westford Cat also for broadcasting as they do so that this is more accessible to our public in general.
Thank you, thank you. And with that, Dr. Chu, the floor is yours for any opening remarks you want to share.
Thank you very much. Please call me Chris. I do appreciate you saying that, Gloria, about the repeating information, because I did discover that in the second of the parent groups, and I was like, wait a second, I think I'm saying the same thing that I said earlier. And it was a similar question. And then I had to sort of, release that, the idea of like, wait a second, but it is, but you get in the habit of, wait a second, I think I've already said this, and or just the idea that you don't necessarily want to repeat something because you feel like, wait, this is a new person asking the question. So I appreciate you acknowledging that, because yeah, that's likely to happen, right? If I could, I'd like to just briefly start with Alicia and Sean and Chris heard me say a little bit of this when I met with them preliminarily. There's pieces that you don't necessarily know about me that aren't on my paperwork, aren't on my resume, and hasn't necessarily been something that's ever come up in conversation in my work here. So I thought I would just kind of start with a little bit of that information to give us some context, or to share some context about me. So I grew up as a neighbor of Westford. I like to think that I was a good neighbor of Westford. When I was a kid, I grew up in the next town over on the other side of the border, on the other side of Baptist Pond and Hart Lake, and where the 4-H grounds are. And as a child, I'd ride my bike into Westford before Route 110 and Littleton Road was really as developed as it is now, and go to Pete's comic book shop with my brother and friends from our neighborhood. My family has used Kimball's ice cream as the standard in my entire life. That's the gold standard that I've known for ice cream. My mother would probably be embarrassed for me to say that there were many a times when that was our Sunday dinner. That's what we did. We went and we had ice cream, big old ice cream from Kimball's for dinner. And so I have been, while I'm not fortunate to have gone through Westford public schools specifically, Westford has been a part of my formation as I was growing up. When I was going to college and I would be coming back on 495, I would just exhale and breathe when I would get off 495 in Westford, knowing that I was just minutes from home. And so little things like that are things that I haven't necessarily talked about, but my relationship with Westford has been my entire life. And so that wouldn't be something that you would see, because I didn't, until working in Westford, it wouldn't be reflected in where I went to high school or anything like that. So I just think that that's an interesting thing that I wanted to share with everybody before we start. And that's really all I had. And asking you to please, call me Chris. I'm more interested and eager to hear your questions, so we can kind of get into that, and I might be able to reserve some of my time for answering questions.
All right, we'll work on the Chris part, and forgive us if we lapse into the Dr. Chu part, but we'll work on the Chris part. And first question, I believe, is Avery.
Sorry about that. I had to unmute. So hello, Chris.
Hello.
Good to see you again.
See you too.
So there are different paths to the Office of Superintendent, many districts that one can work in. With a variety of paths and options available, why you as a candidate, why Westford, and why now?
Okay. Wow, great. I'm going to take it apart and not necessarily do it in order. Why Westford? Well, because I believe deeply in the work that we're doing here. I love this community. I love this district. I love what we've been doing. I respect and appreciate the work that my colleagues have been doing as well. I believe in the direction that we're headed. I believe in the future of this district. And while I appreciate how phenomenally great it is, I also see how it can continue to grow. And so I'm very passionate about that. I'm not interested in applying to become a superintendent in a different district. I am ready to become a superintendent. I have loved my work at the building level. I have loved it, and I feel like I am ready to expand the number of people for whom I'm advocating, to expand that to the entire district. So why now? Frankly, I'm very concerned about the future, and I'm concerned that if someone who knows the work that we've been doing and is familiar with, I think, our struggles and our successes, wasn't able to step into the leadership position, then I would be concerned about the potential direction that the district could go. I very much want to be an advocate for the entire district. I feel like as an advocate for 7 years for Stony Brook, I've been the chief advocate. I've been, I believe, a proud and vocal contributor to all of our district discussions. And I've been very clear as to the entire discussion that needs to take place and all of the complex issues in other buildings, and where, as a member of the team, I would be contributing, and where I need to listen to the contributions of other, and where there are needs in other buildings that could very well be greater than the needs that we have at Stony Brook. But then where there are times when the needs at Stony Brook were greater. And I very much am ready and prepared to become that advocate and that champion, if you will, for the entire district, and to become the person who is ready to engage not only in the conversations within our district and help to remove obstacles and barriers for other people in other buildings, but to also be an ambassador to the town and to truly lend my expertise and my experience, and I think my perspective, to those conversations. I believe that the first part of that question was, the different paths, and I think that the path of being a principal and then becoming a superintendent I'm prepared for that, and I think that is a viable path. In essence, I'm the chief executive officer of one aspect of the district, and the leadership demands and the leadership qualities that are necessary for success translate to the chief executive officer of the entire district as well too. So I think I'll end there.
Hi, Chris. Good evening. A school district's primary purpose should always be about education. But for the classroom experience to be successful for our students, Westford schools must also provide a range of services, including human resource supports for approximately 800 employees, regular school bus and special education transportation, school food services, maintenance and cleanliness of facilities, technology infrastructure, health services, and counseling support, to name a few. What in your professional experience qualifies you to lead and manage such a large and varied organization that serves approximately 5,000 students and their families?
Well, similar to my last answer, a little bit, I believe that each building is a microcosm of the district. And much of that work that you just described, I have been doing, and I believe successfully, at the building level. And I've been in communication with the rest of the district leadership on the larger picture of all of those conversations. And so I understand how each building exists in the entire wheel, and the extension that is necessary to, again, expand the number of people that I will be advocating for and supporting, and trying to, again, like I said earlier, remove their obstacles that are in their way. Learning is essentially relational. Quality learning doesn't happen without positive relationships. I mean, that we know that research has told us that, and we just know that from experience. And so all of this work we need to have strong positive relationships in order to be effective in all of that work. Right now, I believe that I have positive, confident relationships, open working relationships with the district leadership. And I believe that I am in a position where I can begin to take on the responsibility to shepherd their causes and to champion all of the different needs of the various stakeholders in the district because of those relationships.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chris.
Hi.
Traditional classroom learning is not for everyone, and the remote and hybrid models during the pandemic have forced us to rethink how we approach learning. How will you incorporate those lessons learned and broaden the educational experience of our students to include a range of pedagogical approaches?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. I think that we're so eager to move towards a more familiar space and potentially revert to what we might have called normal, that a danger would be to not explore and evaluate all of the benefits that we've just experienced from the models and from remote learning specifically. And so I think that it is important that we look at, I mean, the example that you even gave is that there are students who are thriving in the remote environment for various reasons. Sometimes it's because they specifically are finding their voice in communication in a Google Classroom in a way that they might not have felt comfortable raising their hand in a classroom full of people. Just like we also have students who are completely uncomfortable with the idea that they're on camera, and they're more comfortable in a room full of students because they don't necessarily feel that everybody is watching them. But then when the camera's on, there's a sense that everybody be watching you. So the idea that we've learned how these two different environments can benefit our students is something that we must explore. At the very least, what we know that we didn't necessarily know a year ago is that we can quickly adapt to meeting the individual needs of a student in a remote environment moving forward. That might have been, I used the word Herculean effort earlier because a student had asked a similar question. Because we've had students who have been medically compromised or had various different things that might have kept them from being able to come into the building for an extended period of time, or even, a shorter window of time, but that could have a direct impact if they were to miss that amount of instruction. And now we know that we have the resources that we would be able to allow students. I mean, it's not necessarily easy, right? So I don't want to make it sound like it's just a flip of a switch and it's easy. But we now know that it would be possible to have a student, say an individual, live stream into their classes, or a couple of students if they weren't able to be there for any specific reason. And a year ago, other than very, very specific scenarios, we weren't necessarily exploring that. And so if somebody felt like that was something that would benefit them, if we had students who were struggling with school phobia in different ways, if we had students who, like I said, if it was a hospitalization, or it could just be any reason that they might not be able to come into the building for a temporary period, we might not have looked at that as a resource because it might have been daunting in one respect, right? I could imagine that for a teacher never having engaged in something like that, they might be really concerned as to how that would work. But now we were forced to change quickly, and we were forced to actually, on a dime, rethink in many ways our strategies and practices. And so that's one example. Another example quickly would just be the idea that although many of our teachers use Google Classroom and were using Google Classroom before the pandemic, they weren't all using it, and now they are. And now there's a whole different layer of consistency that we can focus on and make sure that we attend to, so that students are having similar experiences. At the middle school level, one thing is that we specifically sixth graders, they had a binder for everything, and the teachers were teaching them how to organize their binders. And one of the things we talked about right away was, okay, as great as that organization is and that executive functioning help can be, the shift that the teachers made to teaching them how to organize their Google Classroom and to organize all their digital work is profound, and actually, I think, much more beneficial for most students, not all, but for most students, than the traditional binders of old.
Good evening, Chris. Meaningful and effective equity and inclusion mean different things to different people. What does that look like to you, and how would you communicate the how and the why to someone who was resistant? And if you could please give us some specific examples.
Oh, you went on mute at the very end. You said specific example. I'm
Sorry, of specific examples of your work in this area.
Thank you. Well, good, because I'm going to start at the end there, right? So that's good that I actually heard that last bit, what you wanted the specific example of. I think first and foremost, equity work is personal work, and so it's our personal understanding. And so for me, on my own, embarrassingly, it took me a long time to understand this, but for me to really understand the privileges that I've had, I mean, on one level, people would discuss it, for a long time, we've talked about it, but to really dig in deep and to understand the disproportional privileges that I've had as a cisgender white male it's alarming. It's alarming when you actually look back on it and you see just how different that experience is. And first of all, there are a lot of people who don't really still understand that. So that I'm going to layer in the resistance piece in a second. That personal journey, like I said, I think all equity work at its heart is personal work. And so I'll throw a quote out there that I feel kind of speaks to this that I read recently. Alicia, last time you mentioned you like to hear about new books, right? So in February, this phenomenal book came out. It's called 5 Principles for Equity-Focused School Leadership. And it just came out in February, and it's specifically designed for K-12 schools. And so it is in itself a guide to help develop equity leaders and equity leadership and an equity leader lens. And they shared a quote in that book that I think is profound to this moment in time. It's a Mahatma Gandhi quote that is, I'm going to paraphrase it, so forgive me if I mess it up, but it's basically, as human beings, our greatness doesn't lie in our ability to remake the world. Our greatness lies in our ability to remake ourselves. And so they talk about the fact that equity is personal work first and foremost. So and so I've tried to learn as much and listen as much as possible. And I went through a phase of, oh, wait a second, honestly, as a white male, I need to be quiet. I need to stop talking and I need to just listen. And then I started to understand that in positions of power and where I have privilege, I should be leveraging that privilege and that power to expand the microphone to other voices so that other people's voices are being heard. And that's where that personal work comes into play. As public educators, we've been talking about educating all students forever. But you said at the very beginning of your question that there's a wide variety of the way people look at equity, right? And so when we consider that, as our understanding of equity is expanding and people are waking up to what that means, as public schools, are we embracing that charge and that responsibility, that it is our responsibility to provide equitable situations and equitable access to all. One of the somewhere in the middle, I think I might have lost your question. So I'm talking about my personal experience has been thus so far, right? I'm going to talk about things that I've done. So years ago, when I came here, from feedback that I had from the faculty, there were some concerns about just their comfort level in talking about different racial issues. So we purchased, well, actually didn't purchase it. I asked for it because they give it out for free. Teaching Tolerance, they have this wonderful resource called Speaking Up at School. And so I asked for them. They just want to know that you're going to use it, which is really nice. And they sent me copies for the entire faculty. And so that year we used that literature to engage in multiple conversations. And what we found was that the faculty felt more confident interceding when they saw and heard students engaging in either inappropriate, biased, prejudicial, bigoted conversations of any kind, they felt more comfortable engaging in that. They didn't feel comfortable correcting a colleague if something was said in the faculty room, or if somebody said something. And so we spent a lot of time talking about that, okay? And I spent a lot of time modeling and telling them that if I understand that, and if I ever said anything that made people uncomfortable, I need them to speak up, because there are things that I don't know that I don't know. And so that was something that we had talked about a great deal. I think a problem that I discovered, and something that I learned from that, is that I didn't necessarily realize that we needed to keep having those conversations. So I thought that we spent a year talking about it, and I gave everybody this great resource, and they knew how I felt about it, and they knew that I was passionate about making sure that we were clearly creating an environment that was accepting and welcoming to all, and that everybody felt like they belonged here. But I I didn't completely continue to check in on how people felt about it. And so we started moving on towards mindfulness, and we were bringing all of these things in together as we come closer to trauma-invested work. And with the amplification of the social unrest and the social justice unrest from the last spring, we know that it's been going on for a long time, but not everybody was paying attention to it. Well, a lot of people started paying attention to it, and that's where I started realizing we really need to attend to those conversations. And so I've been actively participating in the Bar We groups, both the district and the building level. When I had teachers who reached out to me because they wanted to read Stamped with our students, immediately I was on board for supporting that, and I made that clear to everybody, and I articulated my support to that, which was sending a very clear message to everybody. And so we had this wonderful book group that was a voluntary thing that a number of our teachers worked on with students. And I didn't join them at the beginning because I wanted all the students to feel comfortable having the open conversations. So I joined them at the very end because I wanted it to be clear to them that I valued, respected, and appreciated the conversations that they were having, and that I supported, and that I myself was on a journey trying to make sure that I was working towards equity in everything that I was doing. And we're going to use Stamped in our 8th grade selections of it in our civics and in our ELA classes next year, based on the work that the students did. So that's an example of something that we've done most recently. And that was a really long-winded answer, and I apologize for that.
That's okay. Chair, if I could just follow up to the other part of the question.
Sure thing.
The other part of the question is, how do you communicate the how and the why to people who may be resistant? Because it's not always going to be in a palatable discussion, a comfortable discussion, or even a discussion someone is open to. So how do you communicate that to people who are resistant?
Thank you. Thank you. I forgot that part of it. Thank you. The optimist in me wants to believe that everybody who is engaging in public school education will understand at some point that equity is at the heart of everything that we're doing. So that's the optimist in me. I believe that when I interact with somebody who is resistant to an idea, and specifically this, because there are people. One of the things that happened is when we started the building, the Bar We is building anti-racist white educators, and we tried to start it a number of years ago, and there wasn't that much activity in it. And I think a lot of people were turned off by the white educators aspect of the name of the group. And the group comes from, it was started in Maryland, and it's an organization that has wonderful resources to it. And the whole point of the organization is talking about acknowledging that 80% of public school educators are white in this country. And so we need to make sure that we are actively engaged in anti-racist work and actually working to disrupt and to dismantle the systemic forms of racism that exist. And it is the white educators. In the past, I think it would be easy for people to be like, oh, well, it's that racism isn't my problem. It is our problem. It's actually our problem. And so the calm person in me knows that I need to listen. And so if somebody is resistant to this idea, I need to listen and understand why they might be resistant. Because the reason I found that many people are resistant is because they just aren't comfortable, because they might not have all of the tools or language to engage in the conversation. Or there might be a defensiveness because they think that something is being taken away in a way that they might become defensive about. So I think it's incredibly important to listen, to understand where that resistance is coming from. And so that open dialogue can continue, so that somebody might begin to understand the importance of this work. And people need to have room to explore that, because like I said earlier, it is a very personal work. And so we need to do that. So we need to do everything we can to understand where that resistance is coming from. I do think that there comes a point, though, where as we know that that is the charge and the work that we need to do as educators, that if there are people who continue to disagree with that focus and do not think that it is the work of public school educators, then there might come a time where conversations take place where someone needs to ask whether that's really the line of work that they want to be in, whether they want to continue in this work. And so I feel like with having time to be able to explore where that resistance exists, and maybe bringing voices together, because when you have resistance of any form, if you understand where it's coming from, you might build a stronger coalition. But then in terms of equity work, if there are people within a system who are working actively against that work, then there might come a time where that relationship needs to be severed.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chris.
Hi.
In a high-achieving district like Westford, sometimes our students are afraid to take risks or make mistakes. Modeling healthy risk-taking and being willing to admit our own mistakes is one way to help combat this issue. In that spirit, please tell us about a time that you took a risk professionally and perhaps made a mistake and what you learned from it.
Well, I like to think of them as growth opportunities, and I seem to discover growth opportunities on a daily basis. That's a great question. In all sincerity, I do talk about that a lot, and I do think that I model for the faculty and the students, sometimes quite humorously, and sometimes it's just a fact, that I make mistakes, and that we make mistakes, whether it's with technology, whether it's in the middle of a presentation, whether it's over the PA, and I'm making an announcement in the morning, and I say something incorrectly, or I say the wrong day of the week, little things like that. I've always talked with the faculty about acknowledging my responsibility to create an environment where they feel safe and confident to be able to take risks so that they can grow. And that therefore I believe that it's their responsibility to do the same thing in their classrooms. So we talk about that a great deal. So I really appreciate that question. I would say a learning or growth opportunity professionally that I experienced, besides not paying attention to my dog needing to sit on my lap last night in a school committee presentation when she decided at that moment in time she wanted my attention. That I'm not really sure exactly how I'll fix that in the future. But I would say that a number of years ago, when we first started talking about project-based learning at Stony Brook, I was very enthusiastically in support of it. I was very enthusiastic in supporting the teachers who were interested in volunteering to embark on this journey and to try something new. And I take responsibility for the fact that some of my enthusiasm, I think, was interpreted as a judgment that it was better than what they were doing. And so my desire to be supportive and to always clearly make sure that everybody felt supported because these two individual teachers were truly going out on a limb and exploring something that was very different than what their previous experience had been, I put a lot of focus in making sure that they were well supported, and in some ways I kept some of the different voices at bay. I didn't want them to burn under the magnifying glass, if you will. So I wasn't necessarily always telling the curriculum coordinators about what the two teachers were thinking about in the initial, this is before we had students in the program. This is in the initial phases. And so I feel like I might have insulted some of the curriculum coordinators and some of the teachers in the building, and that was not my intent. So I needed to do damage control. I needed to listen and understand why there might been some resistance to what we were talking about, because I wasn't saying that one thing was better than another. I was saying this is a different opportunity that our students deserve to explore, and we need to explore this opportunity. And so it took a little while, and I think that I was able to do that. I feel like because I acknowledged it, and because I took time to make sure that the curriculum coordinators knew that the doors were wide open to them once we got moving. But I was concerned about the number of times that somebody might say no before we were able to do something, that the teachers needed to have a chance to try it. And then even within the sixth grade team, our sixth grade team is phenomenal here. And I sensed that there were some divisions that started to happen because one team was different than the others. And there was a perception that I might be thinking that one was better than the other. And that just wasn't true, and it wasn't the case. So I needed to fix that.
Thank you. And I am keeping one eye on the time, Chris, so I will let you know we're on question 6 of 13.
Okay.
We'll just keep our pace moving, because we would like to get through all the questions.
Me too.
But with that said, a public school district is only as good as its educational staff. You are certainly well aware of how proud we are in Westford of all of our instructional staff, from traditional classroom teachers, special educators, integrated arts staff, interventionists, teaching assistants, everyone who has an impact on a student's educational experience. So can you provide examples of ways in which you have worked to develop, support, and retain high quality educators in Westford?
Okay. Well, I do believe that the environment that I have taken care to create here at Stony Brook has had an impact on retaining teachers and their development. I think the examples of encouraging the teachers here know that they are free to fail, right? And that I encourage them to take risks and to try new things, because that's how we're all going to grow collectively, and that is how they're going to grow individually. And in the end, it's best for their students. And they know that that's not just talk, that I live that, and I live that on a daily basis. I think the teachers know that the priorities that I share every single year with the students is the same for the faculty. So the 3 priorities are always safety, physical and emotional safety is the first priority. That is our job, right? The second is growth. That is also our responsibility, to make sure that everybody is growing. And I always stress that includes all of the adults. And the third is happiness. Everybody's happiness is a priority, because if we don't have a happy workforce or happy students, then the rest of the work is for naught, right? I don't want teachers putting on a burden when they come into the school, because they're not going to be as effective as they possibly can. So I believe wholeheartedly in doing everything that I can to provide an environment where they are intrinsically enjoying themselves and they are happy in the work that they do. And I believe that has been part of people's decision to continue to stay here, and people to come here, people who have come and wanted to work with us because of their colleagues who have told them when there's been openings. As far as developing teachers too. I believe that we need to provide leadership opportunities for teachers, like true leadership opportunities for them, because there are a lot of teachers who don't necessarily want to go into administration, right? They very much want to stay in the classroom, but they don't always have. We need pre-K through 12 opportunities for teachers to be developed as leaders. We have informal ways of doing it, but we haven't used the teacher leader stipend for a long time. And I do think that it's something that we should be exploring, because I think the gains would be substantial. I'll just leave it at those answers, and I'll keep it kind of short.
Okay, on to me. Chris, hi. Hoping you can provide an example or two, if you have two, of a time that you made a decision that you felt was in the best interest of students, but for whatever reason proved to be unpopular, whether it be unpopular with your staff, with parents and caregivers, with the students themselves, with your dog, unpopular. Right. So what happened, and then how did you respond?
My dog is very opinionated, so there's way too many examples there to give about how unpopular things that I've done there. I'm going to just say that the description that I gave for Valerie about professional learning growth and opportunity, about the PBL program, that in many ways that was unpopular for certain groups of people. Okay, so that in itself was unpopular. The idea that there was going to be a different experience in one team versus another. So I'm just going to say that was unpopular, and kind of all of the work that we did in order to make sure that there was equity, and that although things might be interdisciplinary in one spot, that the strategies and the skills were still being developed in other areas as well. And most importantly, that all the teachers felt well supported is something that I worked towards to help deal with that unpopular thing. I got to say, another thing is our learning model, right? Our learning model, I stand by the fact that it is educationally still the best model. I have not seen, I know leaders in plenty of other districts around the state. I have family members all over the country working in different school systems. And I truly believe that the learning model, while it is not ideal, while yes, it does not work for every single family, and I understand that and I acknowledge that, it was designed with the students in mind, based on the feedback that we got in the spring about the concern about students and teachers being able to connect with each other. And so we focused on creating a model where every single day students would be able to connect with their teachers. And so I think that was unpopular. It's still unpopular. Right now, moving back to, and I worked very hard on developing that. So I take it kind of personally in that vein. So I would say that those are two examples where the focus was truly on students and the benefit of students, and they were unpopular in sectors. And so in order to kind of help bring everybody forward, a lot of conversations need to take place, and people need to listen and understand. To the other resistance comment that we had earlier, to Alicia's question, that exists in a lot of decisions, and the way in which we help is by making sure that as much information is transparent in the first place, so that people understand the wide variety of elements that are going into the decisions.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Chris, this one's the tough one. Buckle up. What is a book that you've read or a movie that you've seen recently that you enjoyed? Okay. And no cheating by using the book you already mentioned earlier.
Okay, good. Actually, when you say something like that, I guess I liked it, but that isn't what jumped to my mind. So I'm glad you told me not to do that anyway. My family does think that I'm weird because I do enjoy reading educational texts, like a lot of them. And I just do, but that's just me. But so I'm going to go with, you say that, and I'm still going to cheat a little bit, and I'm not going to say a movie. I loved WandaVision. I loved it. I watched it with my family. It was on one level, it was like a guilty pleasure, but we binged watched so many things during the pandemic that just the idea of having to wait till Friday for something to drop again and have to watch it the way that I watched things growing up and to share that lovely experience with my family and my children. But the other piece of it is that it was deep. I mean, it's a Marvel piece that's like, full of entertainment, but it was really deep. It was like an intense study on grief and feminism, and at the same time a celebration of sitcoms. So WandaVision, I loved it.
Okay, it's been on my list for a while, and now I have my weekend to binge. Thank you.
Yeah, I would break it up a little bit. I really would. I'd break it up, even though it's going to be hard to do that because the episodes are super short, and you're going to be like, ah. But I think the experience, even if you break it up for like a couple of hours, I would encourage that because it helps. That anticipation is a part of it.
Chris, Westford is a high achieving district that also values social emotional balance for students. Can you provide some examples of ways that you sought to balance high academic achievement for students with their physical, social, and emotional well-being?
Great. I'm proud to say that I think we've done a lot of that. I think there's more to do. I think we still have to keep doing it, but it's something that I value and I do think is more important. I believe that the social emotional well-being of our students is more important than the specific academic achievement, because only when a student, and teachers for that matter, are in their most well-grounded place can they truly access their education. So that's something we've talked about here at Stony Brook the whole time that I've been here, starting with mindfulness, starting about self-care. And I always lead with that. There's things that we've got where when we were doing trauma invested work most recently, and I think those resources were wonderful. The last thing that the authors talk about is taking care of yourself. Don't forget to take care of yourself. Don't forget to keep fuel in your tank. That's honestly the first thing that I talk about when I'm talking with the teachers, because they need to know that up front. They need to be taking care of themselves. We've been in a society where workaholics is something that people wear as a badge of honor, right? And I think we are doing our children a grave disservice, and we're doing ourselves a grave disservice by continuing to not talk about the balance. And we need to really talk about what is that healthy balance. Are we doing work that we enjoy? And when we have to do work that we don't enjoy, is our tank full in order to do that? So philosophically, I believe in that, and I talk about that all the time. Some examples will be, right away, we were examining, even before we dealt with challenge success, we were already examining the amount of homework that students had here. And I was surprised when I came to the district, because in my previous work in other districts, we had looked closely on what the national standards were, which was 10 minutes, an expectation of 10 minutes of homework per grade level, which would mean in 6th grade, the total amount of work that a student might be expected to do would be an hour, not more than that, right? And we already had students in 6th grade who had an hour's worth of work in one class at a time. And it was a little bit extreme. And so we really started talking about that. And one of the things that I needed to do, which surprised me, I needed to give permission to teachers to not give homework, right? There were teachers who were like, wait, I don't have to give homework. I'm like, no, you don't have to give homework. That's actually not one of the most important skills that we need to be working on with students. We want to know that they understand the concepts the next day. We want to know that they understand the concepts without you being in front of them, but it doesn't have to be homework per se. I've encouraged shifting. You heard me say this earlier, Sean, with the students. I've encouraged shifting the conversation to just preparation, right? And I was a big proponent of talking about, is the work that we're assigning, is it preparation? Is it purposeful? Is it meaningful? And is it for specific preparation? Because that's the work we do as adults, right? We call it homework when we have to do something outside of what we might think is our regular work hours, if you will, but it's really just work. You just have to be prepared. You have to get your work done and you have to be prepared. So I feel like that shift alone has been a big thing. And we can't just assume that it's happened, because the work that we did with Challenge Success, we actually need to keep reminding people that we're developing work that is purposeful and meaningful and is for preparation, so that then we're collecting that feedback, so that that's our intent. And if that's not the way that it's being received, we need to know that so that we can make those adjustments. So those are just a couple of examples there. But I think that it's important that we are attending to the social emotional well-being of all of our students, all of them, and our staff first and foremost. And as we look to some familiarity to next year and even to the spring, that must be our focus. That must be our focus, and not, oh my gosh, are we behind? Because that's not healthy. That's not a healthy way for us to approach this transition.
Thank you.
Chris, it's often thought that budgets are moral documents, that they reflect our values. What process would you have used, or will you use, to gain feedback from your staff in formulating a budget that reflects the values of the district?
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I agree that it is a representation of the priorities. In my education, I actually learned that a budget, it was 4 different things that kind of do that same thing, that a budget is first and foremost a policy document, right? And that it is a reflection of the policy that the school committee is creating and that then we are enacting. The next, it's a financial plan that's helping us to look where we need to go and where we've come from with the resources that we have, and to develop what resources we need to get there. The third aspect of it is that it's an operational guide, right? So that as we're on the boots on the ground in a given year, we're also looking at and assessing where these resources are at. And then the last aspect that I learned to consider it as is that it's a communication tool that in itself is communicating our values, similar to what you just said, Avery, right? That it's a moral document. So I believe that we need to constantly look at the budget from multiple lenses and to consider what story the budget is telling and the impact that it has on the stakeholders. And the only way to do that is to engage in multiple conversations and to have exhaustive explanations. And I know that's scary because you guys have long meetings. And I know that you've worked to think about, okay, well, what can we change that makes this season a little bit different and more tangible? Well, I do think that we as a school also needs to help you. We need to be able to communicate that year round, right? We need to be able to find a way. And then there are times it gets really frustrating when we're in the room and someone comes at the vote and asks a question that was talked about 3 weeks earlier or a month earlier. And I know that frustration. And that's when I have to just swallow my pride and say, okay, wait a second. It clearly was not effectively communicated. And so what else do we need to do? Do we need to have multiple ways to communicate it? If I am fortunate enough to become the superintendent, do I need to do a tour, a grand tour to the Cameron Senior Center, to the library, to Rodenbush, to actually go to when we can, to go to where people are going to be more comfortable listening to this information and breaking it down appropriately for each group so that the groups can understand the unbelievable complexity to our budget. I think honestly, just even a couple of weeks ago, I think Ming Chen, you asked a question about our per pupil expenditures and have we been tracking over time how that is. And so that's one of the things that I've been looking at, because I want to look at specifically our per pupil expenditures in comparison to our foundation budget that the state is setting for us, right? And the increase that has, that the state, that they're analyzing all of our resources in town and they're saying your required budget should be increased by this much. So that then, is that a better way for us to communicate to the town that we have layers of cross checks, right? And references and regulations that impact the school budget that don't necessarily impact all the other budgets, all the other budgets in town. So we need to figure out, are we effectively communicating that when we're talking about our needs? That was, again, long.
And I think there was a second part to the question, and I think you've answered it. It says, then how would you communicate budget challenges to the community at large while also conveying the district impact to students and staff?
Well, okay, one little snarky thing I just want to say, I think it would really be kind of fun to do a Schoolhouse Rock version of what circuit breaker is, right? That just might be a fun way to kind of approach some of it at some point, that it might make a little bit more sense at some point. So I just said that publicly. So that's a thought, right? But in seriousness, though, I think it really is important that the fact that there's now a standing budget subcommittee is I think really important, right? And so that work, even on that regular communication, is taking place throughout the year, is I think a really impactful change. This year, there's new dynamics, right? So you don't necessarily want to go into the same long hours that we had before, but then we're slapped with a pandemic, which is totally different. So I think it's difficult to evaluate this year's budget cycle to last year's budget cycle. We really need to kind of continue with, I think, the goals and the things that you were trying to put in place as a committee, and see, okay, how is that going to play out when we don't necessarily have a year that the revenue has been slashed, so I'd want to continue that work, but I feel like that communication piece of it, I think I still did answer that. Yeah.
Thank you. And I like Schoolhouse Rock.
Right? I mean, that'd be fun.
Chris, so no school district is perfect, Westford included. You can disagree with me if you want on that too. But if we can agree,
I'll hear you. I'll see what you have to say.
If we agree on that basis, when negative behavior or discipline issues arise, whether they be students or staff amongst themselves, the community has to respond in a manner that's effective, it's sustainable, and it's culturally sensitive. Can you provide us with examples of how you've built a culture of trust and responsiveness that responds to conflict and behavior issues?
Yeah, I was going to make another joke, but then it really got really serious there. So I'm just going to dive in. I do believe that at its foundation and at its heart, behavior is communication. And so we need to make sure that everybody understands that, right? That all behavior is communication of some form. And so the more we invest and attend to our relationships with all of our students and with the staff, the greater success we will have when we are faced with issues where someone's manner of communicating has become something that would be a disciplinary issue. And so there are times, safety is first and foremost the most important thing, right? So there might be times when a scenario, if it's a safety concern where other people might need to be removed, first for the privacy of the individual, right, and for the safety of that individual and for the safety of others, and that might be something that needs to take place. But throughout the process of trying to maintain the safety and try to work towards regulation, if it's a situation where the individual is dysregulated for some reason, and that we're trying to help come back to a sense where they're able to have a little bit more self-regulation at that moment in time, if that's possible, then that all needs to be done with as much humanity and dignity as possible and respect, because we need to really pay close attention to that. And so I believe that all of those things are very individual. And so all of the examples would be very specific and individual, and we have to approach them and respond to them in a very individual and respectful manner. The first thing being safety, right? But then if we talk about physical safety, the next piece is the emotional safety. And that takes a little bit longer to make sure that we're able to support. And if we need to repair, we need to repair. If relationships have been damaged and we need to help facilitate conversation for relationships to be repaired, then we need to be trained and prepared to do that. There are times when discipline is such at a case, or the relationship is irreparable, And bringing those two individuals is going to actually do more harm to one or both of the individuals. And we need to know the difference there. We need to know when it's appropriate to have a conversation and when it's appropriate to no longer engage these two individuals. And so that's very different. I have had experience, a great deal of experience, helping to facilitate that with students and with adults, with teachers in the building, with parents and teachers, with administrators from different buildings or even within the same building. I've had a lot of experience with trying to remain singularly focused on listening and doing everything I can to understand what is being communicated, so that then I can, in a respectful way, kind of help move people towards the steps of repair.
Thank you.
All right. As the Chief Executive Officer of the district, how do you keep your committee informed? In particular, what's your strategy around issues that are your responsibility, but where the school committee may have an interest?
Great. I do feel like the relationship between the superintendent and the school committee, it has to be a partnership, and it has to be built on trust, and it has to have open and honest dialogue and feedback. I think constructive, critical feedback and supportive feedback. I believe that what needs to be modeled is civil discourse. And so there are times when we disagree, and we need to be able to do that in a civil manner so that we are modeling that for the entire community, for the district, for students, for parents as well. And I think there might be times when difficult conversations need to take place on a personal level. If there's specifically something between the superintendent and a member or a couple of individuals where there's just a great disconnect that is making that civil discourse difficult, then we need to be able to have an open and honest dialogue. I believe that in my practice, I have successfully been able to have open and honest conversations and provide direct and sometimes frank feedback in a respectful and humane manner that it doesn't always necessarily feel great, but it's been done out of respect. And I think it's always been acknowledged that it's been done respectfully, and that and I've received it that way too. And there are times that if my pride gets in the way, I need to check myself and ask myself, okay, is this just my pride at this moment in time? And make sure that I'm also listening and I think open to that. I think you need to have as much transparent data and vetted data as possible before you can make decisions. But one of the things that I talked about with the parents a little while ago was the challenge that can happen if there's a disconnect between the school committee very much never wanting to be blindsided, right? And I totally understand that. I understand that as a chief executive officer of the building right here, right? That I don't want to be blindsided, and sometimes that happens. Sometimes the union might send an email to teachers that I don't know that they're about to send, and I'll have a bunch of teachers at the door asking me questions that I didn't know that the information was communicated, or that I might not even know what they're talking about. And so I understand that feeling, and I understand how it can really undermine our I think our confidence at different times. And so I think that I would want to encourage a relationship so that if you felt blindsided, that I'm able to support you so that we don't necessarily take it personal. But the flip side is that sometimes we need to figure out a way to put something on the school committee's agenda or on your radar so that then we can truly collect the data before we even do a presentation about something. Because that's been a problem with this cycle of a lot of questions that then need us to go back and get more answers. And there are times, I'll just give examples like some of the learning models changes that we've talked about, where I had anecdotal information from some teachers who might have shared information, but I didn't actually have an opportunity to really survey the staff to get their impression on, say, maybe bringing the two pods together before talking about it with the school committee, because we hadn't talked about it yet. And so that puts us in a bind. So I feel like there has to be a way that we can develop some protocols and an understanding that the school the folks who are doing the work during the school day and in the buildings are able to move forward and collect information, even sometimes before presenting things to you that wouldn't make you feel blindsided. So I'd need to understand that, if that's a way. So that would be a part of that. That's a part of that communication. And then the last thing is, I think we would all spend quality time together trying to work on the Schoolhouse Rock video, because I feel like you might have to be involved in that.
I'm not signing up for dancing.
We will give everybody choices, Valerie, as to how they would want to participate, right? So everybody would have an option.
How do you view the superintendent's role with the town administration, given that Westford consistently ranks high in academic performance, but has a budget that spends significantly less per pupil than comparable districts?
Yeah, I do feel like the superintendent's first job is to be an advocate and a champion for the district. And so to be able to effectively communicate what the needs are of the district, and specifically why certain things might be asked for or requested at different times. The other piece is, I'm just going to talk about what I had mentioned earlier about people really understanding the complexity of the school budget. And I think it's really important for me to understand the complexity of the other budgets, right? So that then I can have an informed conversation with them, because the more I understand, then the more I can also help and provide input and participation. But I do think that there is still a misunderstanding and confusion with town boards and just with some of the members of the Westford community about the varying different levels that are indicated in our budget. I mean, a good example is that people ask the question, our enrollment has been going down for a number of years, but yet the budget keeps going up. And I know we explained that, and I know we've talked about the different resources that are necessary, but have we actually looked and noticed that, again, the state's required contribution, the state, what they said is our required contribution as a town, that has also gone up every single year while the enrollment has gone down. So the figures that they're using and the very complex algorithms that they use to determine what our required spending is has also increased every single year while our enrollment has gone down. And I think that that's an important thing that we communicate, so that people understand it, so they don't just think that there's wasteful spending or that we're just asking for more and more. And that's a big piece of it, Valerie. How are we doing on time? I seem like we've asked a lot more. We've got a lot more questions that just went through, but I honestly was not keeping count.
That's okay. I think we just finished our final prepared questions, so
Okay.
we kind of sped up for the second half. Thanks for that.
Nice.
I think we might have
take the feedback. I work with the feedback. Okay.
We might have time for one or two quick follow-ups.
Okay.
I'll see if I see somebody waving at me. I know. Oh, Chris, there we go.
I'll make it easy because I'll do a follow-up to the last question we just did. You know, when we were looking at this question, I thought it was really fascinating because of the last clause, you know, or the last half, which is Westford consistently ranks high in academic performance, but has a budget that spends significantly less per pupil than comparable districts. Can you talk, I think you've talked pretty well about like working with the town administration, working with the public. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what's your take on that, just that part of the question? We rank high academically, but we have a per pupil budget is pretty low.
I think that one of the most, well, I said this to the superintendent years ago when it happened, that I was not happy that we were ranked the best deal, the best for our buck. I can't remember exactly the terminology, right? But we were the best bang for the buck, or whatever the case. And I was like, oh, that's not good. That is not going to be good. Because yes, we are very high achieving, and I feel like that sends the wrong message for people who were concerned about school spending. And I think that's difficult. I think that I'm proud, and we should all be proud of how unbelievably strong the district is when we are spending $2,000 less per student than I think Groton. And it's going to be, we're spending less per student than Acton. I don't know if it's $2,000 or not. I can't remember. And if I'm wrong, and it's specifically anybody in Groton, I apologize for that. But that's just the number that's jumping out of my head when I was looking at that per pupil expenditure to see what that is. So I feel like that needs to be a part of the conversation that we talk about, and we say, it's not about we need to spend as much as somebody else, right? It's not about that. However, when our constituents and people in the town are comparing us to other towns and saying things like, well, Groton Dunstable has gone back earlier, or Acton Boxborough is going back, or different things like that. The first thing we need to look at is, are we comparing all of the resources equally? Are we spending as much on our students as others are? Do we have the same resources that other districts have? And so I feel like that's an important piece of that conversation. And it doesn't mean that we should just definitely be spending more. So I'm not advocating for that. But I do think, and it really, again, Ming Chen, it kind of goes, you asked the question a little while ago, and I feel like we need to continually look at that. And we need to look at what we're spending compared to others, because sometimes that's an easier way for us to say, oh, that makes sense. Why then we might want to increase this amount, or we might say we don't necessarily need to do that, because look at the impact that it is having on our per pupil expenditure.
Thanks a lot for that.
I'll kind of piggyback on the piggyback there. There have been certain goals and initiatives that this district has really been unable to move forward on because of limitations of resources, like free full day K for all, and most recently later school start times and how that intermeshes with all of the complex transportation needs. So how do you, with limited resources, work towards achieving some of those district goals and priorities?
Yeah, that's, I think the first part is, if it's a priority, right, then it does need to appear in the budget, right? Then we do need to figure out, what does it look like, though? Because you acknowledge the fact that with limited resources, what does that mean? So with what we looked about with this later start times, okay, we looked at that, and we looked at that with 4-tier busing. Well, while I supported the plan that we proposed to you, I believe that it was the most educationally sound based on what we had in terms of somebody has to go last and somebody has to go first. That educationally, that made the most sense, even though it was a significant change. And I understand the concerns that people had, but I don't think 4-tier busing is the best thing that we should be doing. And I would really want to avoid that at all costs. Ideally, we would have 2-tier busing, right? That would be the ideal. And we would have the earlier kids, K through 5, all going to school at the same time, and the 6 through 12 students going to school at the same time. That would be the ideal, because those two pockets are the sweet spots for the learning groups. So how do we do that, right? Because we looked at that as a committee. We had the Citizen Action Committee trying to look at that, and we realized that it was going to be too costly to do that. I do think one of the things that we do is that we don't stop looking at it. We don't let it fall off the radar. We don't stop examining it, because what the information that we had 3 years ago is different than the information that we have now. And we didn't spend as much time talking about flipping the start times as much as we were trying to massage and shift the times. We never really, at least as far as I'm aware, my memory, it could be, I could be missing some of these conversations. So I apologize to anybody who was involved in those conversations. I just don't remember extensive conversations about really looking at the flip, because we just didn't really talk about it that much. And so keeping it on the radar, right? Keeping it as a priority and continuing to look at it. What else can we do? Full day K is an incredibly important priority. As a district, as a public school, we should be funding it. It should not be tuition based, right? As a public school in Massachusetts, it should be fully funded. However, if we can't yet do that, if we're not able to do that, then are there ways that with the actual system that we have in place that we can still expand and extend the opportunity for everybody who wants to participate in it, including people who can afford the full tuition and people who cannot afford the tuition? Can we come up with creative ways to allow more students to participate who are able to afford the tuition that can help support students who might not be able to afford it, so that we can actually not have a cap on it necessarily, but expand it for everybody, and then allow the half day, anybody who is really passionate about maintaining a half day kindergarten can opt out of that, because there are families that don't want their kids to be in full day K. They actually very much, based on their family dynamics, want the students to be participating in only a half day and not a full day. And so I feel like if we have an opt out option, right, going in reverse, we might be able to explore that might expand it. But I would need to have way more people involved in that conversation, because that admittedly is not a conversation that I have been a part of over the last couple of years. So I would really want to dive deep into what has already been explored, what has already been looked at with the leadership, with parents and with the school committee, to figure out, okay, is there something else? But I think that aspect of continuing to look at it, as exhausting as that is, the resources could be different next year than they were 3 years ago.
Thank you. And unless anyone else is waving at me, I think to keep pace and fairness, that we're trying to keep, relatively equal time between the various finalists. I think it's time to toss the mic back at you for any closing remarks you have for us.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed this. I've enjoyed that the day, as long as it has been, it's actually been a lot of fun, because I feel, as much as it's been conversations, I mean, a series of questions can seem like they're not conversations, but it felt like there were a lot of conversations that were taking place, which I value. I think that I've said the things that I've wanted to say. I appreciate all of the stakeholders, the parents, the leadership, the students, the members of the community who took time to listen in, both to be supportive and also to figure out who this crazy guy might be, and the people who took time to listen because they might be concerned about an internal candidate. The people who might be like, you know what, for one reason or another, they might be like, I don't want somebody from inside, because they think that we need a whole new change to move us forward. And so for people who felt that way, who took the time to listen, I'm optimistic that I was able to share with them that I have always been sort of an individual thinker, and it has been in my DNA, much to probably the annoyance of my family members and people who are in my personal life, that I do constantly tend to challenge and ask clarifying questions. And it's never been in my nature to settle for just what has been. I don't believe in change for change's sake, but I do believe in constant reflection. And we should be asking ourselves, are there ways that we can grow? Are there ways that we can improve as a system and as individuals? So I just hope that people got a sense of that.
Well, thank you very much. And now we're going to move into the phase where we are going to remove you from our screen. No offense. And then we're going to give the committee an opportunity to share information gained during reference checks or our site visit to ourselves. And we're going to have that final discussion before we adjourn for the evening. But thank you very much for all your time tonight, and all of, running the marathon gauntlet of remote meetings that you did today. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. You all need to make sure that you get a lot of sleep too. You've been running a marathon, and I know that you've been running a marathon. And so we need to model self-care. We need to model that. You guys need to make sure that you're taking care of yourselves as well too.
Thank you.
Well, to that end, I had a Facebook friend, I think it was yesterday, post that yesterday was National Nap Day. And so I think,
oh my gosh,
I don't know
I'm
if I
going
have
to
the
celebrate
authority.
that tomorrow. I'm going to continue that celebration. Naps.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to maybe make a motion to make it Westford Nap Week, but let's just do it. We just by consensus, if we all agree, it's Westford Nap Week. So,
Big
so
yes.
decreed.
Thank you for sharing that information. I'm going to put that on my calendar now so that I will know for next year not to miss that.
Exactly.
School committee gets to nap on Friday.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you guys don't. I'm really sorry about that. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Okay, school committee members, does anybody want to take the lead on site visits? I feel like we've been doing that part first. Or I can dive in with the notes I've got. Nobody's waving at me, so I'll dive in and supplement as needed. Obviously, Dr. Chu, Chris, is somebody we know, but I still found it really interesting to talk to people within the district about him and about how they have viewed him and interacted with him over the years. I thought one very insightful thing that Superintendent Olson commented on was that Chris has a way of getting to, he has kind of a knack for getting to the heart of an issue, kind of the essence of a problem, and really called him a leader among leaders, and that on the leadership team, I think many on the leadership team felt that Dr. Chu served as kind of a bridge, not just advocating for needs at the middle school district, but as someone who kind of formed that bridge K-12 from the elementary transition into the middle school, and then how our students transition on to the high school. So they felt like he had that K-12 vision. One person referred to him as a Renaissance man, and I think we can all see that. He does have, the confidence of the staff. I found it particularly telling that in the range of people that he arranged for us to talk to, that included a lot of mental health staff and also the head custodian at Stony Brook. And I thought that was a very thoughtful inclusion of someone who's an important and valued staff member. A number of people noted how they really felt that even beyond a leader at Stony, that Dr. Chu had really stepped up during this pandemic year, and had really provided a lot of leadership beyond his own building. And let's see, many people found that, in envisioning him making the move from a building leadership to a district leadership, felt that that he could provide a balance between stability and innovation, while also making things fun. I heard that the word fun several times, although apparently his staff meetings are rather long. Let's see, what else? One staff member, and I thought this was also really telling, was talking about how supportive he can be of staff. And she commented that she had a comfort level with him, that she could go into his office and say, okay, I'm upset about this. This is the part where I'm going to cry. And he would nod and say, yes, this is the part where you're going to cry. And then we're going to talk and work it out. And just the fact that she was able to tell that story with humor and also appreciation for the empathy and support that he had for his staff was really telling. So those were the things that I pulled out. Avery?
So I wanted to focus a little bit. I thought that I thought it was wonderful that he put together a group of middle school students for us to speak to. I'm not sure that we did that with many other candidates. And the one thing they wanted us to ask all of the candidates was what would be the legacy that they would leave in Westford, which I thought was a very interesting question. One of the young men said that he was a man of the people, but it has to be my favorite quote is that one of the young ladies said that he was a golden retriever and that he was friendly to everyone. So I'm not sure there's much topping that Dr. Chu is a golden retriever. So I will leave Dr. Chu the golden retriever.
Golden Retriever. I missed that one. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah, no, that's beautiful.
That was great. Valerie.
Hard to circle back to leadership team after that, but I'll try. A couple quotes that struck me from our current leadership team was that Dr. Chu's sphere of influence has moved beyond Stony Brook and middle school level to the district wide. He has a knowledge of what goes on at elementary and high school and has become more global in his perspective of total school operations. Another said he has a unique respect from the rest of the leadership team. When he speaks, everybody listens. Lots of times that we are not on the same page, those are my favorite conversations. I am always learning something and often he shifts my thinking. And then some points that to support the comments you made, Gloria, from staff. I heard a lot of about his open door policy, that he wasn't someone said specifically, he's not a leader by fear, that we feel valued and he's got a great ability to bring people together. And I just can't add anything to the students.
Alicia.
So most of what I heard from almost every stakeholder group was the word relationships. Every group said to us, he builds relationships. The second thing almost every group said was listens. He listens. And I found it especially interesting to hear from some parents who had said they had gone to Dr. Chu and they were upset about something and they were disagreeing about something. And when they left, they didn't necessarily agree, but they understood his position and they understood where he was coming from. And it led them to a better understanding of the conversation as a whole. A lot of the discussion, because you guys covered almost everything else, there was a lot of discussion about his conflict resolution style, which is from multiple stakeholder groups, calm and unflappable, finding a positive way. There's a lot of talk about collaborative problem solving and coming to a situation with empathy and with respect so that everyone feels heard in the conversation. And yeah, I was there for the golden retriever comment. That was pretty funny. I have to say, it's part of what I think I took away from the stakeholder groups was also which stakeholder groups were sent to us, because the candidate sends the groups to you, and the broad cross representation of the district. We joke about we were interviewing ourselves, but we were interviewing a broad cross section of the district. And I found that not only helpful, but very telling as well.
Chris.
So not much else that hasn't been covered, but from the leadership team, I heard somebody say Chris is grounded in the best pedagogy and best results for students. He asks very thoughtful questions. And then one that struck me was leadership team member who has also been a parent of a Stony Brook student, said that he was able to ground me as a parent to think beyond grades and to ask what else is important in my child's life. And so that speaks to the social emotional, which I wanted to also grab a parent quote because we did meet with parents. And the one that I pulled out was that he's an innovative educator. They cited project-based learning, said he had a very thorough understanding of things going on in the school system that carried over into challenge success, and that he wasn't just concerned with what was going on at Stony Brook, but also things at Blanchard, at the elementary schools, with the students coming up, and that he has looked at things in a systems way, always looking for ways to make things better.
All right, Ming Chen.
I think you guys cover a lot of stuff. I was actually it's last Thursday. I think it's last Thursday. So with the superintendent and the leadership team, a lot of basically the creative communication skill, people talk about. I was a parent of Stony Brook School, so I have seen like Dr. Chu's all those weekend updates. The SEL folks, and then also a bunch of comments from various administrators regarding hit the ground running, which trust between school and town, when the budget to develop from an internal candidate, and then continuity. I think Gloria, you mentioned that, proven records for the last 7 years with Stony Brook School.
Anything else on site visits, or Sean, you're up for site visits and you did references, right?
Yeah, I did references. So whenever you're ready, I'm happy to go through references.
Great. I think we're good. Go for it.
Okay. So this particular colleague who I spoke to also dealt with Chris as a parent, spoke very highly of him from a parent perspective, said that he was there and gave a lot of support to them as a parent, wasn't breathing down their neck, but was helpful in facilitating things, identified him or described him as being empathic and helpful. And then as a colleague, some of the same stuff that Valerie spoke to, that when he speaks, you listen. And that's his gift, is within communications. Another one that I thought was very telling was that Chris makes you question your stance on things. And I thought that was telling also. Another reference spoke to that he was great even when that there was disagreements, that when he enters into a room, particularly with tough issues and working in a team environment, that he does his best to engage everyone in conversation, the whole room. This particular reference really drove home that they didn't believe that this was a stepping stone by any means, that Chris is within Westford and for the long haul, and really has an interest in advancing our community as far as he can take it. Another reference spoke to that Chris represents stability, but will also help make Westford its best self, right? Again, this has been reiterated through the leadership team, but that he will have the respect of the leadership team on day one. This particular reference spoke to that really that they've never heard anyone say anything bad about him. And then speaking to transparency, said that, all you have to do is look at Chris's newsletters, his weekly newsletters, and that, the length of them, how articulate they are, and how much information he tries to give the community from week to week. So that's what I have from the references.
Great. Anything else this evening? Okay, then I will thank the community once again for joining us. We really value everyone's participation in this process. We know it's a lot of evenings in a row, and it means a lot that you're taking the time to join us. For anyone excuse me, who joined us this evening or through another event, forum earlier today. You will receive a link to the survey monkey feedback form. We really do read those, and we really do value your feedback. So please share your thoughts with us. We appreciate that. And we'll be back tomorrow night for our 4th of 4 finalists. And then we'll be back on Thursday to do our final deliberation and vote on this very important future leader of the Westford schools. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And all in favor, Avery,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Alicia,
Aye.
Ming Chen,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
Valerie,
Aye.
and I. So we are adjourned, and we will see you back tomorrow night and Thursday. Thanks so much, everybody. Good night.
Aye.
All right.